All right. So this video is just a little update what happened in the last year, but also just really from my perspective, what. One second. All right. Okay, so this video is just a little update what we did last year with LCOYs, what happened. Also a little background again, just a mini one, what LCOYs actually are, how they came about, and then really focus on what I did. And the goal for this video is just to have for future people who get involved in the LCOY working group, want to push through new ideas, that they have an idea what I did. It's not comprehensive, so it's really a selection. Just to give an idea, some kind of overview. And if you want to know more about individual parts, just contact me anytime. So just a little background again. So LCOYs, this is all based on just documents that I read. I wasn't involved in that time, but LCOYs came about more or less in 2015 when the global COY team really pushed for the engagement on the local level. So it was really the team that came together in France that really pushed for the creation and involvement of LCOYs. And then in the following years, 2016 in Marrakesh and 2017 in Bonn, this idea of LCOYs was already there. Local teams did it again. So, for example, people in Madagascar were inspired people in Mauritius to organize LCOYs. So it was way more decentralized. So the COY teams didn't initiate, the global COY teams didn't initiate the creation of LCOYs, but had to work together or could work together with groups that were already engaged on the local level. So my main point is there that it became more and more difficult for global COY teams to work together with LCOY teams because they didn't start basically together on a project, but they had to kind of find their way together. Right. So 3 points I want to mention about the LCOY process last year. First, the application process, which took up a lot of work, then the final output process, and then doing the COY. So what the LCOYs did during the global COY in Katowice. About the application process. First a little bit about my personal involvement. I went to the Global COY in Bonn in 2017, more or less stumbled into it by accident, came back to the Netherlands with a group of engaged people from the Netherlands, and we decided that we want to bring the idea of LCOYs, so the idea of bringing youth together at one place and empowering each other in the country, but also forming a connection to the international network. We decided that we want to bring this to the Netherlands, so organize a local conference of youth here. Not really knowing much about what is going on in Yango. We did a lot of research trying to read up about it. And then also what really inspired me and what I found really interesting was the idea of this final output. So that LCOYs not just empower youth on the local level, but also feed into the global COY, into the COP. So this is how I got involved on the international level in the LCOY facilitation team, because at that point there wasn't really a clear structure of how the final output could work. So I really tried to find that out. Another interest that really drove me to get involved on the international level was that I wanted to know what's going on in other LCOYs. I wanted to know what these LCOYs are that inspired so many people to get active. So I did a lot of conversations, a lot of chats, but also interviews, so like formal interviews for a research project that I did with LCOYs in different countries, for example, Mauritania and Mauritius and Argentina. Right. So about the application process. The application process last year was very similar to the application process this year. If I'm not wrong, it was actually for the first time carried out in 2018. Before that, there wasn't really a clear application process. And it was also in several tranches, so I think 4 or 5. It's slightly different to the way how it is done this year is that LCOYs would directly apply. So the point is that groups would fill out the application form and send then the application form to the LCOY facilitation team. While this year, groups that are interested to organize an LCOY first express their interest, then there's a first contact, at least ideally. So someone from the LCOY working group would contact them, have a conversation with them, and then send the application form. So the difference there is that the first contact between interested groups and Yango or the LCOY facilitation team was last year and the sending of an application, while this year the first contact is really a conversation, at least ideally. Right, and the process, how it went, was that the LCOY facilitation team reviewed applications. Similarly to this year, the details aren't so important, but that the recommendations were sent to the Yango email list, so the whole email list of, 3,000 or 4,000 people, and that this email list would then give the final approval or rejection. Then the final output process. Again, as I said, the global COI teams in the years after Paris had it much more difficult to work together with LCOYs, because often LCOY teams were already established. Let's say in Mauritius, they organized an LCOY, I think, for the third time in a row last year, while the global COI team started anew. So basically, they started their process, had to organize this huge conference in Katowice, but at the same time working together with all these groups worldwide that were already established, that had their culture, that had their ideas. So it was a huge task. So it was really, let's say, difficult to bring together these, in total, maybe 20 people, 20 organizations or 20 groups. So two things, like we tried to channel LCOY outputs in two ways into the global COI. The first approach was the so-called Talanoa approach, and the other one, the policy position approach. The Talanoa approach was connected to the Talanoa dialogue that was hosted last year, initiated by the COP23 presidency from Fiji, and just some basic principles of the Talanoa is open dialogue and storytelling, with the goal to bring together conflicting parties and overcome conflicts to get into a problem-solving type of conversation instead of confrontational debates and negotiations. And while the youth could participate in this as a stakeholder, and we wanted to especially engage LCOYs in this formal process, but also taking the ideals of Talanoa, as I said, open dialogue, for example, and storytelling, and engage with this on a more creative level. So the first thing how we tried to engage LCOYs in this was through a toolkit. So not basically saying that LCOYs have to engage in the Talanoa process, but providing information through the toolkit on what the Talanoa process actually is, and then giving guidance on how LCOYs could, for example, engage in the Talanoa dialogue. So the toolkit is there, the link. It's probably best to just have a look at it. One basic feature of this toolkit is that it was written in an international collaboration. So I worked on this, Henrik from Austria worked on this, Rukaya and Nikhil, and other people gave input. And we wrote a standard text, basically, an objective, as much as possible, objective description of what the Talanoa dialogue is. But then in the bottom part, you can see best practices, so examples of how groups intended to work on the Talanoa dialogue. And that's, I think, a very interesting way, because it kind of reflects the complexity of working together on an international level. The idea is that you can't really write in one objective way how to best engage with the Talanoa dialogue. Because there are, of course, different conditions on local levels, so it makes sense to just provide some examples. And then people can just look at the toolkit, look at the examples, and pick and choose the best bits that they like of it, and just leave away the things that don't work in their local context. That was also the time when Friends of the LCOYs, or at that point it was differently called, the Facebook group was created to broaden participation. The idea was really to encourage LCOYs and other local groups to communicate with each other over different issues, exchange experiences, and also kind of create more transparency for the work of the LCOY facilitation team. Then the other approach was the policy position approach. And the idea there is that Yango and the Yango working groups develop policy positions that they give to the COP and also to other UNFCCC processes, and even sustainable development processes in the UN. And these working groups mainly develop their policy positions during the global COI. So in the 2 or 1 week of the global COI, and then maybe they start some weeks in advance to really work together. Problem there is that LCOYs mostly have to plan several months in advance to actually plan their conference, to engage youth throughout the year. Often they are organizations that have other projects going on. So what happens there is that you have quite some different working rhythms. While the working groups really do like a very punctual, very intensive work, the LCOYs have to plan many months in advance. That made it really difficult. This is my analysis of the situation, at least, for them to work together. So this approach really much, I would say, failed. At least it didn't work out that LCOYs as a whole gave some kind of policy position of the youth of country XYZ. Something that we tried there was that we at least say, okay, the younger working groups, please create more transparency, create some kind of guides, maybe a video, maybe a document explaining what you are working on and what you're to achieve and make this public so that LCOYs can at least access this information and then decide themselves how they want to engage with the different themes Yango engages with. Fortunately, this also didn't quite work. Maybe we should have put more energy into it, but not really. The Yango working groups didn't really respond to this call on creating more transparency. So let's see. The next point, during the Global COI. So several LCOY teams were, of course, present during the Global COI, at least some of them. We were, for example, there with, I think, 7 or 8 people from the LCOY Netherlands, also quite some people from Austria, but also really from across the world. At the Global COI, we had one room to present our outputs and to kind of get together. It was one room among maybe 40 or so workshop rooms, and the LCOY room was one of them. Then LCOYs could present shortly their outputs and what they achieved and all kinds of information, whatever they wanted to during the opening and closing ceremony, though it was maybe a 5-minute or 10-minute stretch in each ceremony. So it wasn't a lot of time for the 15 or 20 LCOYs that there were. And this was also moderated by 2 representatives. So I talked at 1 or 2, I don't exactly remember, and some other people, Alfine, for example, and Sid also presented. So it wasn't that every LCOY team spoke. And then in this LCOY room, the members of LCOY teams met twice. So there was really a push to say, okay, hey, people who organize LCOYs, let's meet and let's discuss how the year went for us. What do we criticize? What do we think went well? And what are our plans for next year? And the summary, I have a link there in the presentation. I would say read over it. That's the best way to have a look at it. And there was also then really a lot of excitement to say, okay, let's try to develop this project further in the next year. And really, we were maybe 15 or 20 people in total who engaged in these discussions, but also really 5-6 people who had a lot of energy and motivation to say, okay, let's bring this forward. A lot of ideas were collected. I will show this in a bit. But the main point is that we said, okay, let's create an LCOY working group. So basically, let's develop the LCOY facilitation team to a proper working group, mainly symbolically to show we want to emphasize really the value of LCOYs within the Yango network. So some of the action points that came out of these meetings, not COP24 here, but COI 14. The idea was, just some of the points was the creation of an LCOY toolkit. So similarly to the Talanoa toolkit, to have like a comprehensive guide and some examples and best practices and document templates and also contact details to help people create LCOYs and to give them an idea how LCOYs could look like. Again, a combination of an objective description of what LCOYs are, like the 10 principles that we have now, but also just a lot of examples taking into account that really things can be done differently in local levels. So let's just collect examples to inspire people and to give people the opportunity to pick and choose whatever information is most useful for them. Part of the LCOY working group would also be the establishment of a support working group. So really focusing on getting some people together who want to give support to groups who want to start new LCOYs and support them with maybe moral support, but also just really practical support. From Latin America, several people said, okay, regional cooperation is something that would make sense to focus on that. So really say that LCOYs don't just try to create a network and give input to the international negotiations, but really are also nodal points to create more regional cooperation. And then what was also discussed in these discussions at the COI 14 was to further develop the idea of the final output. One idea that came up and that was was carried forward by Siddhartha from Mauritius was that we could define several themes like oceans, like mitigation, whatever, that applying teams could choose from during the application process. And this way, LCOYs, like teams that applied to do LCOYs could then choose from this list of themes, maybe 2 or 3 themes that they're definitely going to focus on. And this way, giving more planning security also, for example, to the global COI team, so that they can already know, okay, LCOY XYZ is going to focus on these 3 topics, and then it's easier for the global COI team also to engage these groups. So some main aspects of the LCOY working group that was created, we had one major call, like one kickoff call, where we were, I think, quite a lot of people, like 30 or so. I gave a little presentation and then we discussed some aspects of this, how this LCOY working group should work. Like some basic aspects of this working group as transparency, participation. That the idea was, okay, we really want to focus on making processes transparent, showing how things are decided, what sub-working groups they are, and basically helping people to get involved. If you, for example, look at the website or the LCOY working group how-to, you can see that there is really at least the attempt to get people involved through providing information. Another approach was also that we said, okay, this email list is not working very well. It's very difficult for people to have to see information. Much information gets lost. So let's move to working spaces like Slack or MetaMost. Which didn't work out, or which was, didn't work because of concerns that these programs don't work in areas where internet connection is not so good. Then again, focus on support. I already mentioned this. I don't have to go into this again. Focus on really building a beautiful and useful website. So a website that is really appealing to people and gets people inspired to work, but also just a useful website with a lot of resources, and especially with a lot of information of the individual LCOYs. So again, there the idea is that LCOYs are mainly active on the local level. That's their main focus, but at least that they show to the world what they are doing. And one idea that was brought forward by Delphine was to have a blog section in which different LCOY teams can just regularly share stories of their work, but also of the work of youth in their country, to just make this seen to the world, what's happening there. And then the part again with the final output. What went wrong? So after a while, I think it was in March or so, this broad participation that we had in the beginning really stopped. We tried, of course, to get people broadly involved through these transparency aspects that I mentioned earlier, but this really dwindled down. So we weren't anymore these 40 people, but it really boiled down to like maybe 15 people who were really involved. But also happened is that these few people who really said at the Global COY that they want to push this forward, that a couple of them didn't carry this on anymore. So basically what happened is that this capacity with which we started into the LCOY working group process really was much lower than we initially expected. And then with this little capacity that we had, much energy went into the application process. So we developed a new application process and we reviewed the applications, but this took up most of the work of the LCOY working group, so that these other projects like the LCOY toolkit or the creation of a video really fell short. So the things that were actually intended to be new about the LCOY working group as opposed to the LCOY facilitation team didn't happen because there was just simply no capacity. And then core members, I mainly want to talk also about myself. Like I really pushed these things forward, but I had a couple, 1 or 2 months in which I really couldn't keep up the work. I had a lot of things going on in my private life. And that was really the moment when the LCOY working group collapsed, and which was most visible in the last application tranche, where it took us very long to reply to the applications, but also where we made a lot of mistakes simply because there was no capacity. And this is the point where we're at right now. I would definitely talk about the situation that the LCOY working group collapsed. In effect, it's not working right now. Some small issues are taken care of, but for example, there are a lot of groups that want to organize LCOYs, but we are not really able to handle that right now. But something important to keep in mind is that amazing work is still being done on the local level. Again, the most important thing is not that the LCOY working group is working, but that the LCOYs and local teams are just creating value. And this is being done in Mexico and Mauritius. Here, 2 examples also from Europe, Germany and Austria, where the teams are just creating a lot of value through the idea of LCOY. And this we should not forget. And they are not just creating value, but I will get to this point later as well. They also have a lot of capacities there again. They are really effective and efficient to just create value on the local level. And this also brings me then to some ideas that I have on how we can move on. First, we have to work with what is there. So we have to see, okay, what people are still active, what people could we get involved. And then we have to prioritize and divide tasks. What are the most important tasks? I think, we have to see that we manage these groups that already organize LCOYs that are now involved, that we check up on them and see what they're doing right now and if they are still organizing actually LCOYs and trying to give support to them, maybe also helping them to get in touch with the global COI team. And then the groups that are applying to organize LCOYs, that we manage to support them. That's, I think, the most important thing right now, that the teams that are involved in this issue, that they are not left alone or just confused on what is actually going on right now. And I think the only way how we can really manage this well is that we divide tasks. And the easiest way to divide tasks is on a regional basis. So if we want to support groups that already are organizing LCOYs and that want to organize LCOYs, let's divide this on a regional basis. And then the question is, where does the capacity come from to do that? And I personally think it would be great if we reach out to LCOY teams that are already established and ask members of their teams to provide some capacity to the international level. Concretely, this could mean that they share experience on their websites, like writing maybe small toolkits, giving some examples of what they're doing, sharing stories on their websites, and ideally also then on the international website. But also that they help other LCOY teams. So let's say there are people here in the LCOY Netherlands or in LCOY Germany that for sure could support people that are interested to organize LCOYs directly. So we could have something like a buddy system. And these people that are organizing LCOYs already, they know what's going on. They have a lot of experience. So I think there's a very effective way how we can actually get things going. And if we do this then on a regional level, so say that people from LCOY Germany, Austria, Netherlands support other teams that want to organize LCOYs in Europe, then we have a very effective way of supporting each other, at least for now, where we just need to see how we handle all this work. I think a very important part, talking about prioritization, is that we build up the relations with the global COI and somehow try to get some form of communication going, that we maybe get at least the information of the LCOYs that are working on the website, then figuring out with the global COI team together that we manage to get something going and not have this deadlock of communication that we have right now. I think it is important to, when we have LCOYs or teams approaching the LCOY working group and say, well, we would like to organize an LCOY, because there's not really right now much going on in communication with the global COI, that we focus on the aspects of local cooperation and empowerment. Again, that's very much my perspective of LCOYs, but I think what LCOYs do best is that they are cooperative projects of the organizations within a country, so that when people want to organize an LCOY, that it's really that they have to reach out to other organizations first, get their support, and organize an LCOY with them together. It doesn't have to be for a whole country. Like an LCOY in India doesn't have to be a project of all the youth organizations in India. It can also be of a region, but it should be a project of several organizations, of several movements, and not just a project of one organization, of one small group of people. And that these LCOYs focus on empowerment. So empowerment in the sense of teaching people how the UN and international processes work, but especially also empowerment in the sense of network building, capacity building for actions on the local level. And then I think an important point right now is that we just find a small group of people, like 4 or 5 people, who sit together, who say, okay, we have a problem with the LCOY working group. Let's try to fix it. Let's have one call with people who were engaged in the past and say, okay, we need to do something about it. And so that it's not just carried by 1 or 2 people, but that it's like a small group of people who can carry this forward. That's it. And again, that's just a short wrap-up of what I did in the past and some thoughts on what is going on right now. And happy to discuss more on that.